Breaking today on Pattrn, the 5th National Climate Assessment is out. And now with some shocking headlines.
Yeah, we've got a team of climate experts breaking down the massive report so we can better understand the way climate change is impacting average Americans as the White House doubles down on efforts to save our future.
And America is enduring extreme weather at an extreme pace with billion-dollar disasters happening every 3 weeks. It's the fastest rate of increase on record. I'll be taking a closer look at how climate change is driving that devastation and how we can better prepare for strong storms ahead.
And cars and trucks account for 81% of all transportation greenhouse gas emissions in this country. So how do we clean up our transit system to secure a better future? I'll show you answers to that question.
And America's coastlines are facing multiple climate threats from sea level rise, flooding, heat waves, and more powerful storms. And while we can't halt the rising water, we can protect communities from the dangers. I'm exploring which areas of the country are seeing the worst effects and the ways our coasts are adapting.
Changes to our precipitation and temperatures wreaking havoc on our food supply as America faces the worst drought in 1,200 years. But our agriculture sector holds a lot of promise as it works to adapt to changing weather patterns. I'm unpacking the findings as America's farmers secure the future of our food.
All right, so that was Molly. We got Paul, Kelly, and of course, Carl in-house as well. Welcome to Pattrn, the first climate change talk show. I'm Steph Abrams.
And I'm Jordan Steele. As you just saw, we have a special edition today of Pattrn, from the most desired drought in hundreds of years to extreme flooding in your neighborhood. Climate change is touching every part of our lives and livelihoods.
This hour on Pattrn, we're taking a look at those risks and possible solutions as we break down the 5th National Climate Assessment.
Yeah, but we want to start from the beginning. What is the NCA? Why was it written in the first place? We're answering those questions. The National Climate Assessment, also known as the NCA, is a federal report compiling the nation's most important climate research and data. Created by the Global Change Research Act of 1990, this mandated report is reviewed by experts across 13 federal agencies and a panel of the National Academy of Sciences. Then it's delivered to the President and Congress every 4 years. The 1,600-page report is the work of more than 500 authors from across the country. The 2023 assessment covers 5 major themes. How are we addressing climate change? From communities taking action to the latest innovations to combat warming and our changing landscape. How we experience climate change. It takes a look at extreme weather events and how some of the most vulnerable people across the country are feeling the impacts most. The largest portion of the report details what's at risk. For example, climate's impact on our health, food supply, ecosystems, cultures, heritage, and traditions. The next section details where are we headed and how our decisions today affect emissions and risk associated with global warming. And the last portion, this focuses on how we move forward and what we can do to avoid the worst-case scenario.
And as we mentioned earlier, the purpose of the National Climate Assessment is for the federal government to take stock of our climate-driven problem and work towards solutions.
Yeah, and earlier this morning, President Biden spoke about the findings in the NCA while also announcing a $6 billion investment in resiliency projects across the country.
That's going to be focused on key climate goals, including modernizing our aging electric grid to withstand extreme weather, which is causing these forest fires. When those towers come down, the lines snap, they catch fire. The forests catch fire. It costs a lot more money to bury this underground and do other things, but we have to do it. And it's causing significant outages as well. Reducing flood risk in communities, improving drought resilience, supporting conservation for our national parks. I've already been able to conserve 21 million acres of our most precious and sacred lands and waters. In this administration, America will be the place where great science changes what's possible. That's why I've never been more optimistic about America's future. We just have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America. And there's nothing beyond our capacity if we work together.
Now, this is the 5th iteration of the NCA, and this new report is the first to address significant issues like environmental justice and how climate change impacts our food supply.
Yeah, I had a chance to catch up with climate scientist Pattrn, one of the authors of the NCA. Here's what she had to say about the newest problems highlighted in this report. Pattrn, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. So this is the third climate assessment, right? You've been a part of this. What significant changes set this one apart from, let's say, the last assessment in 2018?
So this is actually the fifth assessment, if you can believe it.
Wow.
And I have been a lead author on the second, third, fourth, and now I'm an author on the fifth. So your question is a very good one. What's new? First of all, what we already knew before is still 100% valid. But what we're seeing today is that people are experiencing what the National Climate Assessment has been talking about for 20 years. They're experiencing it right now. Americans across the country are being affected by the extreme weather, and we can put a number on how much worse climate change is making it.
Yeah, and there's so many people in our own circles who have experienced that and have memories of that. Shoot, some of them that's happened this year. But there is a reoccurring theme, it seems, across the entire report, and it's that climate change is disproportionately affecting parts of our population. Why is that an important issue to tackle?
Climate change affects us all, but it doesn't affect us all equally. Low-income neighborhoods in our biggest cities are much more at risk during heat waves that can be up to 15 degrees hotter than a high-income neighborhood in the same city because of their lack of green space and tree cover, which was in turn due to historical racist redlining practices. Indigenous communities, marginalized communities, people who can't afford to live anywhere except in a flood zone, they are the ones most at risk. And that's why when we talk about solutions, we need climate solutions that are also solutions for health, for equity, and for a better future.
Yeah. And something that's interesting that we saw in this report is the aspect of mental health, and that was brought up, eco-anxiety, particularly in adults. We talk about this on our show about teens, but adults, we're talking farmers. Is there a solution or something that we can do to combat this?
As Joan Baez said, the antidote to despair or anxiety is action. Each of us has the ability to make a difference, and it begins with using our voice, something we all have, no matter how young we are or how old we are, to talk about why this matters to us here and now, and to talk about what we could do about it together, whether we attend a school, whether we're part of an organization or a business, whether we're a farmer or a producer, whoever we are, there's something that we can do about it. And it begins with having that conversation with people around us about why it matters and how we can contribute to the change.
Right, and how we can help ultimately. Many Americans have become more worried about air quality, especially if you think about some of the wildfire smoke that's shrouded major cities that we've seen maybe even earlier this year. Are we making any progress in keeping our air clean in our communities, overall healthy?
So since the Clean Air Act, the levels of human-caused pollutants have decreased across the U.S., but we still see that hundreds of thousands of people die every year from breathing in the air pollution from our vehicles and our factories and our industries. Around the year, that number is in the millions. And then now we've got wildfire smoke on top of it. So wildfire smoke is actually decreasing our air quality just when we need to be moving in the opposite direction.
I know, and that's alarming too. This year we saw a lot of it in Canada. Last year it was here in the lower 48. I want to talk about something that was in addition to the report. We have the report, but we also have something called the Climate Atlas. What is that? Why is that important?
I am so excited about that because it offers a tool for people who need climate information to plan to get that information. I've worked in this field myself for over 20 years. I've worked with cities and water districts and states, people who need to look forward to the future to make sure that we have safe places to live, that we have the water that we need, that we're able to grow the food that we need. And today, we can't make those plans if we don't account for how climate is changing, because climate is changing faster today than any time in human history. And so the Atlas offers an accessible way for people to access the information about what their town or their city or their fields or their region will look like in 10, 20, 30 years in the future, and how we can prepare and build resilience to those changes in advance. As our grandparents taught us, a stitch in time saves 9.
What do we do now, though? Like, the assessment's out. We have all this information, 1,600 pages worth. What are we going to do moving forward starting today?
Well, first of all, if you're interested in what the assessment has to say, and it has something to say for everyone, no matter where you live, don't treat it like a novel. Don't start at the beginning and try to make your way through to the end. Jump right to the chapter that you're most interested in. So whether it's the chapter about your region, whether it's the chapter about an issue that you're interested in, whether you're interested in health or equity or transportation or infrastructure, jump right there and educate yourself. That is step number one. Learn what the problem looks like. And then step number two is ask, what can you do, especially working with people around you, to make a difference? Can your company cut its emissions? Is there a candidate that you can vote for your city or for your state who has a plan for becoming more climate resilient? Does your city, does your organization have a climate resilience plan? What can we do together to reduce our emissions, to invest in nature, and to build resilience to the impacts that are already here today? Those are the three things that every single one of us has a role to play in.
Love it. Two-step plan makes it super simple. Pattrn Hayhoe, thank you so much with the Nature Conservancy. We appreciate your time and awareness, of course, on this.
Thank you.
And we are joined now by climate specialist Carl Parker, who is diving into the climate trends outlined in the assessment. Carl, thanks for being with us today to talk about it. This report has been years in the making. As we just heard, every 4 years. It was authored and carefully reviewed by experts in climate science. What are some of the key findings that we didn't necessarily hear from Pattrn?
Well, so we've warmed by 1.1 degrees Celsius globally, but the U.S. has warmed by 60% more than that. And, you know, there's no equivocation as to whether or not we're responsible. I mean, it's just clear cut. There used to be some sort of, softening of that language in the past, and we're just not seeing any of that. We've done it. Period. That's where we are. The oceans are warming rapidly. The atmosphere is warming. It's becoming more humid, so we're getting heavier rain. Ice mass loss has been tremendous, and a lot of that is going into the oceans. So sea level rise has turned out to be a really big concern here.
Yeah, it's hard to look at just the United States when obviously it's all connected. It's a whole global thing, but we got to focus on us right now. When we look at sea level rise on our coasts, what are we seeing now that we weren't 10, 20, 30 years ago?
Well, one of the big takeaways is that sea level rise is not uniform, not globally uniform. So even though globally it's been about 7 inches over the last 100 years, it's actually been 11 inches in the U.S. We've got subsidence along the Gulf Coast. We've got the Gulf Stream slowing as well. So it's a lot more rapid in parts of the U.S. And going forward out to about 2050, we'll probably see about 1 foot to 1.5 feet of additional sea level rise. If you think about that, 1 foot to 1.5 feet in the next 30 years, places like Florida, coastal locations, there's going to be a collapse in real estate in those areas. And, that's starting to show up already a little bit. I mean, it's going to be a really radical change for coastal areas of the U.S.
When we talk about weather, we're talking about acute conditions. 3 days, 5 days out, climate is a 30-year thing. So how has these changes over hundreds of years affected our acute weather that we see day to day?
So a couple of broad changes. One is that the West is generally hotter than it was over many decades. You look at the maps here, you see it's the red showing you where it's hotter. Also the upper Midwest, parts of the Northeast, a lot of that is land use change. And then we're generally wetter in the Northeast and the Midwest and much drier in the West and Southwest. In fact, the driest we've been in 1,200 years. And all of these changes are amplified in extremes. So you see more of the same kind of thing in certain storms.
Now let's talk tropics, tropical activity, hurricanes, right? Everyone remembers 2020 and how many we, beat the charts. We had so many named systems, and now we're starting to see some of these storms become a little bit more aggressive. It seems like can we relate that at all to this changing climate?
Absolutely. If there's more warmth in the oceans, there's more energy that's available to be delivered, especially if there's a greater depth to that warmth. And so we saw what happened with Otis in Mexico. Rapid intensification is a huge risk. That storm went from a tropical storm to a Category 5 storm in 12 hours. And the models missed it for the most part. That's a huge risk. I mean, you think about it, we have like 2 to 3 days a lot of times to prepare for a storm. If you have 12 hours to get ready for a storm, I mean, what's that going to do? And we saw what happened in Acapulco. So that's a huge risk. Another one is that storms are slowing down, and so they're producing more rainfall as a result. Harvey was the prime example of that, just stopped over Houston, and it flooded out an area the size of New Jersey. That is going to be a risk too, as storms have generally slowed by about 17% in North America.
All right, climate specialist Carl Parker joining us again tomorrow to talk more about this. We appreciate you.
A lot more questions.
So many more questions and so much more to talk about also.
Yeah.
Welcome back into Pattrn, your home for the latest news in climate change and sustainability. I'm Steph Abrams.
And I'm Jordan Steele. Got the breaking news today. U.S. climate scientists now say the U.S. is warming 60% faster than the global average. All right? That's according to the 5th National Climate Assessment, which was released today by 13 federal government agencies.
All right, so the report paints a dire picture of what the country will face as our planet continues to warm. Greenhouse gases are now at their highest level, listen to this, in 800,000 years.
It's hard to comprehend.
It's hard to even imagine, right? To fuel more devastating storms. In fact, the U.S. now experiences a $1 billion climate or weather disaster every 3 weeks on average.
Yeah, there's a glimmer of hope with this assessment because emissions, they've declined from their peak in 2007.
That's really good. That's really good. We spoke to Dr. Cletus from the Union of Concerned Scientists about what America's future holds in the wake of this report.
We have solutions to help cut our heat trapping emissions. Switching to a clean energy economy is both beneficial for addressing climate change as well as cutting the pollution from fossil fuels that's affecting our health right now, especially in low-income and Black and Brown communities across the country. So this is a win-win. By switching from fossil fuels to clean energy, we really can take action, and that can affect the kind of future your children, my children, future generations all over the world will have. Let's leave them a safer world.
And you know what, if we think about like consistent access to clean water and fresh food, that isn't a given to everyone here in the U.S. Molly McCullum joins us now with a look at how the climate crisis is impacting our food supply. Molly, of course, you're here doing the weather anyway. We really appreciate you chatting to us about this specific topic. So this is the first NCA that have actually addressed food specifically. What are some of the big findings that you kind of found in
Which
this
is
report?
crazy when you think this is the first time they've ever addressed food systems, because that's something that we all
It's really
rely on. A food
impacted, too.
system we all have to eat to survive. So the biggest findings that they found is that it's affecting how we grow our food, where we grow it, and the nutrition of our food. So basically, climate and extreme weather is affecting every single aspect of our food system, from production all the way down to consumption. And there's a cascading and compounding effect on that as you go down the line. So I want to talk about consumption first because, of course, that's what a lot of us are concerned about. And one of the biggest things is soil health. So the nutrition of our food it's not as nutritiously dense because of the soil health, because of climate, droughts, floods, you name it, pretty much all the things that we have listed there on screen. But one of the biggest things is cost. We already know that food is getting more expensive. And it's a complex topic because it's not always climate change that is the only impact on, the cost of food. But this report found that by 2050, a 26% price increase in both corn and wheat due to climate change.
That's
You think about how many things corn and wheat are
in everything.
Yes. And so that would increase a lot of prices across all of our entire food system. But another thing is that it found that there are people that are affected unequally. So you have food system workers that are exposed to this extreme heat and high humidity. You have unsafe days to be outside working, which then reduces the amount of agriculture that's produced. But then those are also the groups that are typically most food insecure. Right. So you have both of those affecting the same group.
Yeah. Now, the problem works both ways. So how does our use of land for agriculture actually contribute to climate change? It's not climate change just affecting that.
Right.
It's what we're doing to the land also impacting the climate.
It goes both ways. So production of food is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions from the food system as a whole. But what I found what was most interesting is that food waste is also a huge contributor. So we actually waste about 30 to 40% of our food.
That's terrible.
Here in the U.S. And that's either at home or at restaurants. So all of that greenhouse gas emissions from the production is basically just being wasted because there's a lot of food that's being thrown away.
So what do we do going forward?
So a lot of
How do we solve it? Molly, how are we going to solve it?
I wish I had an easy answer. A lot of it is adaptation. So coming up with new solutions that are both good for our environment, but also good for some of these societies and our socioeconomic, benefits and all those things. So basically at this point, it's about adaptation until we can reduce our greenhouse gases.
And making the rules. Think about the rules that, for people that are working
Right.
in,
and they are trying to come up with that.
They're trying to.
But, it's a big problem.
A lot of pushback on it, too. Molly, thank you so much for that.
All right, well, every road trip and a jet-setting journey you take, it's contributing to our climate crisis. So up next, Paul Goodlow is going to give us a look at what the future holds for emissions-free travel. From the cars we drive to the neighborhoods we live in, we're going to see how we can reduce our impact.
And for the first time in history, the National Climate Assessment is using art to tell the story of the climate crisis. Here from Poet Laureate next.
Welcome back to Pattrn, everybody. Our energy infrastructure is working overtime just to keep up with the increasing demand.
The fact is, our grid was actually designed for the 20th century, which means it's vulnerable to climate impacts like wildfires, extreme precipitation, rising temperatures, and more intense storms.
Yeah, and so there is one solution set to put some of these power lines underground.
Yeah.
Steph talks about that all the time, right?
Yeah, the president mentioned it today as well.
Right. This could help protect the grid from blackouts during these extreme weather events. But this is going to come with a big cost because burying those lines takes manpower and it takes maintenance.
Can you imagine every time you need to fix a line, you got to dig everything up?
Or
it would be a
find
lot.
where it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, according to the NCA, it costs about $750 to install lines underground, which is 10 times the cost of traditional power lines on utility poles.
But we do need solutions, right? And here's why. This is a look at the change in electricity demand between 2020 and 2050. You can see many states will see between a 50 to 75% jump in energy use during that time.
Compare that to expected changes in the next 80 years. By then, no state is immune to major changes in demand for electricity.
But here's the good news. Clean energy could be the key to solving our supply and demand problem. U.S. emissions have declined from their peak in 2007, and the National Climate Assessment says that that's because of our investments in clean energy.
Now, our emissions from electricity have dropped 40% in the last 2 decades. Coal use is declining, which is great, making way for solar and wind. And that's helped the cost of renewables drop too. The cost of wind power was slashed by 70%, and solar costs dropped 90%. That's huge.
That is huge. Our emissions from electricity have decreased too. Transportation has become the leading source of greenhouse gases in the U.S. We got Paul Goodlow here joining us now to talk about this. Paul, explain why transportation continues to be such a major contributor to our climate crisis.
Of all transportation greenhouse gas emissions, more than 80% from cars and trucks. We have Thanksgiving coming up next week. A lot of folks getting in their cars, driving to grandma, a couple hours. You know, that's part of it. But also, once you get there, how many trips to the grocery store to kind of, oh, I forgot this or I ran out of this. So those short trips, not very efficient. Then we also love to have everything delivered overnight and through 2 or 3 day prime delivery and all that. All those trucks making those quick stops, maybe 3 times on your block. And things like school buses. All things that do emissions in a low efficiency. Yes, you can drive long distances, but if we take those short stops and make them in a hydrogen or a EV, no tailpipe emissions, we immediately have a big impact on the transportation sector. And again, the infrastructure bill putting a lot of money towards expanding the charging network, also for tax incentives, not only for people buying the cars, but also businesses buying cars.
Yeah.
So perhaps, I know Amazon is doing a big push on battery trucks dropping off your packages in a day or two as well. So slowly but surely, we're improving our air quality and reducing our emissions.
Let's talk about the infrastructure and playing a big role in transportation, obviously, like we were just talking about. How does the urban design actually factor into our climate crisis?
Well, it's all about kind of adding green things to the area and having, roadways with more green around it. So if you have rain events, you can perhaps filter more of that water. Also, we live, 2 out of 3 Americans live in major metropolitan areas. So if we reduce the emissions there, we rapidly improve our air quality. We improve and also decrease the temperatures there, 5 to 7 degrees increase in that urban heat island effect. And that also improves our air quality, which overall improves our health. And then if you have more green spaces and things like green roofs and more tree canopies and even green walls, you also use more of the rainwater that falls. And we also know that with our changing climate, we're seeing bigger swings in these big rain events. Right. So they're going to come, but that could perhaps take the edge off. More people died in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania from Hurricane Ida with the flooding there than did where it made landfall in Louisiana.
Right, it wasn't even a hurricane when it was up there, by the way.
But we're having these wilder extremes because of our changing climate. These things it's not going to stop it. It will start to reduce it, and that's what we need.
Paul, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Welcome back to Pattrn. The worlds of art, literature, and scientific data are colliding in a really good way. For the first time, a book of poems is being released in conjunction with this year's National Climate Assessment Report.
Right. Dear Human, at the Edge of Time, poems on climate change in the United States. That right there features the works of more than 70 poets and scientists. One of those poets is the current Poet Laureate, Ada Limon. She graciously gave us a special reading at the Library of Congress.
Startlement. It is a forgotten pleasure, the pleasure of the unexpected blue-bellied lizard skittering off his sunspot rock. To think, perhaps we are not distinguishable, and therefore no loneliness can exist here. Species to species, in the same blue air, smoke, wing flutter buzzing, a car horn coming. So many unknown languages. To think we have only honored this strange human tongue. If you sit by the riverside, you can see a culmination of all things upstream. We know now we were never at the circle's center. Instead, all around us, something is living or trying to live. The world says, what we are becoming together. The world says, one type of dream has ended and another has just begun. The world says, once we were separate and now we must move in unison.
On calm, that was absolutely beautiful. Well, let's be real. We've heard a lot of bad news from the National Climate Assessment. There's actually a lot of good news, too.
There is. Pattrn climate science producer Allie Van Fleet shares that good news.
Daisy, guess what? The National Climate Assessment just dropped. We're still going through it, but there are some really happy tidbits in this thing. To start, U.S. greenhouse gas emissions have fallen since their peak in 2007. And guess what else? The report noted a 40% drop in the electricity sector, thanks to a decrease in coal and an increase in renewable technologies. Green energy has also gotten way cheaper in the last decade. The cost of wind has dropped 70%, and solar costs have dropped a whopping 90%. In 2020, 80% of new electricity generation came from renewables. And across the U.S., climate action has jumped, and adaptation efforts are underway in every region. In fact, since the last National Climate Assessment in 2018, city and state level adaptation plans have shot up by like 32%. I know, and U.S. state level mitigation projects have increased by 14%.
Did you notice Daisy had on her Pattrn pink scarf as well? We love our new team member there. And we love good news, but if you're still feeling a little overwhelmed by the findings in the National Climate Assessment, you're not alone.
Yeah, we got some advice from psychologist and author Dr. Lisa D'Amour on how to cope.
So much of what is upsetting about climate change is a sense of helplessness that many of us feel. And yet, if we focus on the things we can do, whether it's through personal practices or political action or some combination of both, that can help us to feel better.
We've talked about this a lot. It's when you take action, it always makes you feel better about everything,
right.
I feel like.
And you can't look at the big picture because it freaks you out.
Yeah.
You got to just, what's next?
Yeah.
The next step. Okay.